I'm going to introduce Paul Devine. He's going to be our installation speaker for the day. And Paul's been in the industry over 20 years. He's got some really unique design, and he's our trainer, NCMA-certified trainer. And I'll hand it to you, Paul.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Most important question is what's for lunch? Jersey Mike's. All right, love Jersey Mike's. So as Jimmy mentioned, I've been a contractor. I've done retaining walls, paver patios, door kitchen, stuff like that for about 20 years. Started buying block from Jimmy, what was that, 2002, something like that? And I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, he called me and said, hey, you got any interest in doing retaining wall seminars? And I said, well, what's a retaining wall? I had been buying block for quite a while and great at selling it. And so, through the process of design and installation, you pick up quite a few tricks. And I don't know how long you guys have been doing it. Looking around the room, I see there's probably some guys that have been building walls for 10, 15 years, and maybe some of you guys haven't built a wall. How many guys haven't done one retaining wall? Nobody wants to admit to it? All right, there's one. We'll try to cover everything from basic installation to some more complicated ideas. If you guys have questions, if I don't have the answer, we'll find it for you. And that's another place where Jim, Jared, Joe, all these guys are a great resource for you. I use them every year. I call them up, I harass them, tap them on the shoulder when I need engineering help on a wall. One thing about this seminar is that we're not trying to turn anybody into an engineer, but we want to get you to recognize when you need one, right? So when you get a wall over 4 feet, you've got any kind of, extenuating circumstance, whether it be heavy clay, which we have a lot of here in Minnesota, if you have a surcharge, something like that. We want to really press home that, look at the circumstances that you're building these walls under and decide if you need to get an engineer involved. It's cheap insurance. So with that, we'll jump into installation. So these Zuggerates are, they've been around for 3,000 years. We use this picture in every single seminar, and I think the reason that we like it is because it exemplifies what GeoGrid does. How many of you guys are familiar with GeoGrid? Used it on some walls. So it's basically the same thing as a dead man anchor was for timber retaining walls. Timber walls kind of gone the way of the 35 millimeter camera. I haven't built one in ever, really. When people ask for it, I kind of say I don't do it. But Zuggerates are using basically a geogrid. It's like a woven mesh that goes in between the mud brick. And despite the fact that the stone veneer wore off, hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago, you can see that the geogrid, or that mesh, is actually still holding this thing together. So tons of longevity, and we use the same basic engineering principles today that they were using back then. And there's another picture. If you look close, you can really see the different layers in here. So that would be your grid separation. So they would lay down their mesh, compact over the top of it, do another mesh, compact over the top of it. It's the exact same principle that we use in retaining wall installation today. Great Wall China, same thing. Dry stack stone, only this is a freestanding application. Obviously, it's not carrying a load. It's wall of separation, and I don't know that there's proper backfill in this retaining wall. There's all kinds of rumors that, bodies and everything else, but whatever they put in there, it's working, right? I mean, these things have been around for thousands, 2,700 years old. All dry stack technology. One thing I want to point out here is this little drain vent right here. Water management's one of the important things that you can consider when you're looking at building a retaining wall. Water will destroy anything outside. So, when I go out to a house, I'm looking at downspouts, I'm looking at gutters, I'm looking at where there's, a swale. Is, water going to get directed right behind my wall? Make some extra consideration for drainage. All right, and then we got stone walls. This is like the old school. You still see them in St. Paul. There's lots of big gravity stone walls in St. Paul. Problem with these walls is that in order to push against the forces that are trying to knock them down, at the base, they have to be really wide, right? So you might have a 24, 36, inch wide base on these gravity walls, because that's how much weight you need to resist the force that's coming in behind them. So stone walls can get really expensive, especially once you get up above 3-4 feet. And you can kind of see that side profile. This might be a retaining wall that we have here in St. Paul or in the metro area, but you can see right here, I mean, this might be 4 or 5 feet thick. So from a material standpoint, it gets really expensive and really difficult to build these large natural stone gravity walls. And again, this is kind of that side profile. So you can see the base here, because what we're always trying to do is we're resisting this red arrow, right? This red arrow is Mother Nature. Mother Nature's trying to push your wall down. Our job is to resist that and at least slow that process down. So in order to do that with a gravity wall, we've got a massive base area right here. And that's where a product like VERSA-LOK comes in. The base of that wall is going to be the same width as the top of the wall in most scenarios, unless you have an engineer involved and they spec a different base block width. So here's the traditional timber walls. Are any of you guys still building timber walls? A few guys? Cool. The wood is different, right? It's more of a pressure treat. It's not the creosote. It's not the same stuff. Doesn't last, quite as long as the timber walls did 20, 25 years ago. When we do cost comparisons on them, it seems like block is a much better long-term investment. But there are certainly still applications for these. I've gone in and matched up and repaired timber walls. I try to talk people out of them. But here's those dead man anchors that we were talking about. So this is what GeoGrid now does. Instead of having these dead man anchors cut back into the hillside, GeoGrid runs across the entire length of the wall at different heights. And when we get into the engineering, we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so a lower life expectancy. Here's the side profile. When we get into engineering too, we're going to talk more about this angle of phi or shear plane. That's like a phi. Have you guys heard that term? Angle of phi, failure plane, shear plane. It's got many names, called a lot of different things, but basically it's the natural angle at which any soil will lie. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into engineering, but the main thing here is that our dead man anchors are getting back into this stabilized soil or sustainable soil. All right, and then you got mortared walls. Mortared walls are going to be expensive. I don't know, might be up $90, $100, $110 a square foot for a mortar wall. You have to have a frost footing here in Minnesota because of freeze heave. So it does add a lot of cost, especially on shorter walls. Mortared walls, a different discipline, right? You're doing a block wet set and then attaching a veneer to the face of it. So it's a lot more labor intensive. Lots of codes on those for drainage and weep lines. So if you are doing those, make sure that you check your city codes. And here's the VERSA-LOK. We see that you can do a lot of different jobs with the same block here. We've got a vertical mosaic wall here, obviously. This is like 5 feet tall. There's probably some grid. I would hope that there's some GeoGrid behind that wall, but you can seamlessly transition from retaining wall with a setback to a vertical wall along a stair cheek. And that's something that blew my mind when I first started using VERSA-LOK because, 20 years ago I was buying whatever it was, Menards block, and you'd have to break the back lip off. And then, what do you do about the setback, right? You're going to glue cheek walls 3-4 feet tall. It gave me fits, and so that's one reason VERSA-LOK is such a fantastic and flexible product, is that you can use the same block to build the retaining walls as you can the steps. You can do them vertical, you can do them with a setback, just lots of different options. And we're going to skip that. Maybe I hit a bad button. I don't know. It seems like we're running through the same slides. Okay, well, there was another picture, and I always talk about the same thing there. Is really just block flexibility and how you can use the same block to do so many different jobs. So VERSA-LOK is a gravity wall system. reinforced up to, we built walls 40, 50 feet tall. I've been down to St. Louis. I can't remember if it's St. Louis or Kansas City. We're holding up a Walmart. The retaining wall is like 50-something feet tall. And fantastic product for going tall if you need to. Again, it's one of those situations where you're always going to want to get an engineer involved to walk you through, make sure that you're insured, make sure that you've got somebody with some serious structural training, stamping that plan. And then follow the engineer guidelines, right? Don't deviate from that. If they tell you need 2 feet of clear stone behind the wall, make sure you use 2 feet or better. Overdo it. Always overbuild. Okay, so we got dry laid, no mortar, no rebar. It's a gravity system. We do have pins, and pins create the interlock to avoid horizontal slippage so that the blocks don't slide around on each other in the winter. Main thing here is no frost footings required. So you don't have to dig down 4 or 5 feet and pour concrete to build a VERSA-LOK wall. You got to dig maybe a foot, right? Because we're going to have 6 inches of compacted gravel and probably 1 block embedded, 1 6-inch unit embedded. There are rules that are going to change that. Sometimes you might have 2, 3, 4 blocks embedded depending on if you have a toe slope, depending on how tall the wall is. And we'll get into some of those variables here a little bit later. So here's our mosaic block. Again, Jimmy was kind of talking about how that works. We've got 4 blocks that kind of meld together to create 1 large panel. Main thing with mosaic is, like Jimmy said, get a field guide, because corners, outside corners, inside corners, all these things it's a little bit of a curveball. It's a different animal with mosaic. So make sure you have a field guide. Main thing I've found helpful when I'm explaining to younger guys that haven't done a lot of mosaic walls is think about those 4 blocks as 1 panel, right? So instead of thinking about, okay, I got 6-inch block, 4-inch block, trying to add that up and how you're going to do step ups and step downs, all that stuff. Well, don't think about those panels as 4 separate blocks. Think about it as 1 block, right? Once you pin it together, it's got that same structural integrity. Weathered block is nice. It's sales opportunity, right? Upgrade. We charge more for weathered block, just like, stores charge more. My daughter came home with a new pair of jeans the other day, and they holes everywhere. I'm like, I hope you got a deal on those air-conditioned jeans. It's January. Well, this is the same thing. We beat these blocks up. So they get tumbled a little bit, and it just gives it that rolled edge, kind of an old colonial look. So when I'm, designing a project out at a cabin or maybe even on a historical property, an older house, a lot of times I'll look at weathered block and see if that's an option that fits my client's needs. So form and function, when we talk about form and function, and I'll bounce back to this all the time, you can do so many different jobs with the same block. And here's a great example. Again, you've got your stair transition to a cheek wall, to a standard installation retaining wall, and then right here we've got freestanding, right? So all we have to do is split the back off of these blocks and create a freestanding application. It just makes things so much easier when you don't have to think about, well, how many of these blocks do I need to order, right? You can just order a ton of standards, and if you got one of these crackers, or if you got a guy that's really handy with a hammer and chisel, you can modify that block on site to do a lot of different jobs. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to VERSA-LOK starting out, is just that you don't have to worry about, oh God, we're out of quarter units, right? Because what's happened over the last couple of years, we've had supply chain issues, we've had manufacturing issues, labor issues, all this stuff that's kind of compounded post-COVID in this world we live in. It's getting harder and harder to get special pieces. And that's one really nice thing with VERSA-LOK, is that you do not have to order special corner pieces. You can split those blocks. You can split them to make odd angles. So if you need to do a 40-degree angle, you can split that block to accommodate it right on site. You don't have to pre-order any of these specialized blocks. In my opinion, pin system is the it's the cat's ass. The best way to say it. It's the best way to create interlock between these blocks. Backlocking lips. When you get freeze heave, sometimes you can even see that those lips will lift up off the block that they're sitting on and kind of push forward. And you get that heave. Pins are a more permanent interlock, and these pins are a high-strength fiberglass. Can you break them? Yeah, you can break them if you really try to, but it takes a lot of force to do it. So pin system, in my mind, is superior to the backlocking lips. Another thing I love about VERSA-LOK, and because the system's pinned, we can put a handle on it. And if you guys have ever used block that doesn't have the handle, that is a lifesaver when you're setting base with an 82-pound retaining wall block. Saves your fingers, saves your back, saves the front of your jeans, you know. It's an all-around win for everybody. Color consistency, Jimmy talked about. Tons of effort put into making sure that we have a consistency from year to year with the color of these blocks. So if you do need to add on a year later, you don't have to worry about, you know, trying to pull down some of the old wall and blend it together. I'm sure in this room we're all perfectionists, right? And that's kind of why we do what we do. It's details. So, you know, when you look at something and you're like, you know, what I could do is I could just add on to this. Well, if you don't have consistent color blends, in my mind, I'm a Nazi about it. I got to pull part of the wall down and mix it together and make the old blend with the new, and I want everything to look just right. VERSA-LOK does a great job year to year keeping their colors consistent. Of course, we're a solid block. There's no hollow cores on the standard VERSA-LOK workhorse block. It's a solid concrete. That's what allows it to be split and modified. You don't have to worry about hitting that center void in the middle of the block. So you can split off center with them, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into the freestanding applications. No cores, no lips, no mortar, no frost concerns. So, you know, some guys do pour footings. I've seen guys pour footings for small 3-4 foot walls. We refer back to the NCMA guidelines, right? And is anybody here doing the NCMA certification? Going to take the test and get certified? NCMA recommends just a gravel base. So, you know, again, no requirement to dig way down and do a 4-foot frost footing. You can do a 6-inch gravel pad. We'll talk about how you can use that same procedure to do stairs, retaining walls, freestanding walls. It's all kind of the same game. Straight face blends with surroundings. So what we're talking about there is, you know, we don't have the old diamond-shaped retaining wall blocks anymore. Straight face just has cleaner lines. And that's one thing, again, with VERSA-LOK. You get really nice, clean lines and good consistency. The worst thing about building with some cheaper blocks is that you might get one block that's 5 15/16, and you might get one block that's 6 you know, a 1/16, whatever it might be. But variations in height kill me, again, because then you're shimming these things. It's a huge pain in the butt. That's one nice thing with VERSA-LOK is the height consistency. Land and water applications, we're always trying to make our concrete absorb less water. So VERSA-LOK's got a really low absorption rate. You can use them on shorelines. You can use them along riverbeds. We call it, you know, shoreline type application. Now, if you ever get a project like that, get an engineer involved. The water's going to move around. It doesn't matter how big the block is. Mother Nature's going to win when you're pushing back and forth. You're talking about 1,000 pounds of ice that freeze and move around. Sure, you've seen those videos where the ice sheets, you know, merge up onto the beach and damn near push houses down. So if you get a shoreline application, make sure that you contact an engineer. So here's the pin system. When I'm building large walls, I like to have 2 guys. One guy's gonna set and one guy's gonna pin. So I'm usually gonna put the more skilled guy on the pins. I'm gonna have one guy that's just kind of a schlepper, you know, the guy that, you know, we've got different names, Jimmy and, you know, Jose, whatever. The guy that can never find a marking pencil, right? And his phone's always dead because he can't find his phone charger underneath all the marking pencils in his center console. That's the guy that you want to be setting the block, right? So he's just gonna pick it up, set it on the wall, and then you're gonna have a more skilled guy come across, even them all out, pin them, make sure that they're oriented correctly. I think this is going to show us that we can stack with a variable bond. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal unless you've built some big walls, right? You start doing corners. When you split these corners, you end up with an 8-inch wide block. on this end here. And so it's real nice because it's 8 by 12, so the 12-inch side isn't gonna be on a perfect half bond. And when we say half bond, this is what we're talking about. You can see that this line right here cuts the block below right in half. You can stack VERSA-LOK structurally sound on a quarter bond, which means you only have to have 4 inches of overlap one way or another. And the reason that that's so important is because the pin that goes in here needs to drop into this block. Every block you pin needs to get pinned into 2 blocks below it. That's just the general rule. If you're pinning up here and you've got this block pinned into just 1 block below it, you get no structural integrity there. Those 2 blocks are just going to want to tip forward. So we're always trying to create a bond. And you can see 4-inch, 4-inch would be a quarter bond on a 16-inch wide block, and that's what we got VERSA-LOK. VERSA-LOK 16 inches wide, 12 inches deep, 6 inches tall. So right here we're looking at a quarter bond with 4 inches of overlap, and again that's enough to get those pins down into 2 blocks below. Same thing is true with mosaic. You can actually pin, this would be probably more like an eighth bond almost, because again all you got to do is get that 4-inch overlap right here. This little cobble block, that's a half block, that's still pinning down into 2 blocks below it, right? And the same thing with the standard. The standard is getting pinned into 2 blocks below it. The only deviation with the mosaic is this little weird guy right here gets pinned into 1 block below. But because we're getting pins coming down and breaking these vertical lines, the engineers went ahead and gave us the thumbs up on that and said that's fine. So that's the mosaic system, but again, variable bond pinning is a big plus when you're building large walls. Kind of slide that around. That drives me crazy because we've got a line coming up through 3 vertical blocks. Anybody think that's okay? Yay, nay? When I look at this, it drives me crazy, but the engineers say it's cool. You can do it. You can sign off on that. And it's because, again, we're not looking at this as 4 separate blocks. We're looking at that panel as 1 large block. So even though that line comes up through part of it, this accent block breaks that bridge. And so you can go ahead and stack these things just like that. Would I do that? I don't know. Looking at it drives me crazy. But again, engineers said it's okay. You got the sign off on that, so you can go ahead and stack that wall up just like that if you prefer to do it. It's closer to a half bond. And as an example, look, now we've got these 2 vertical blocks here. We've got the jumper, but then this line is still in line with those 2 blocks below. So it's really the same thing. Essentially, it's the same thing we were looking at before. Catches my eye, but again, it's structurally sound. Okay, so this is our square foot block. Square foot block, you do have to core fill. That's part of the engineering spec. So when you start reading into the square foot block and its capabilities, know that those capabilities are based on a core fill. So that's an extra step. Anybody got any tricks? How many of you guys have done core fill blocks and have it like a trick to keep the rocks from getting in those ruts or those spines of the block? So what I've seen a lot of guys do, and I don't build a whole lot of square foot walls, but if you look real close, what do you see right there? It's a little hunk of rope. So what they've done is they've actually run rope down through that rut because that's how you're going to pin your blocks. And if you've ever had to get in with a screwdriver and wedge little clear rock pieces out of your retaining wall gaps, you know that that's a job nobody wants. So if you put a rope in here like that, you do your core fill, dump everything in, whip the rope out, and you've got clean lines. You're ready to stack that next row. Core fill walls are nice for drainage. You get a lot more drainage capability out of them. Again, it's just an extra step. A lot of times they're going to be lighter, so you can schlep them up on the wall a little bit quicker, but then you have to go back and do that additional step. Same thing as the standard block, high strength, low absorption, weather resistant. Whoop, that's a great picture there. Patio Pete, Jason is I guess he's modeling that awesome lifter. And I think we've got some of these lifters we're going to give away a little bit later too. So if you haven't used those, make sure you do it. This guy's missing his steel toes, but I guess we'll let him slide on this one. So, you know, again, having that handle on there when you're setting base, massively valuable. I want to point out one thing about this picture. Where's that string line? It's not on the face of the block, right? Whenever you put a string line on the face of the block, it's really difficult to keep straight because these blocks have a broke face texture. So we've got the string line running across the back side or the manufactured side of these blocks to make sure and keep them right in line. Having that handle on there just allows you to be super surgical about how you set them, so you're not doing like what I call a controlled drop, where, you know, you're setting your block, you're getting it close, and then you just kind of poof, let go, hope one corner doesn't hit first. That handle's a lifesaver when it comes to setting base. Pretty slick way to move them. Get a grapple bucket on there, and you can slide three blocks around pretty easy with that. Every year it seems like blocks are getting bigger and bigger. You look over here, we've got Rosetta stuff. You know, some of these blocks are 2,600 pounds, so they're machine set. The nice thing about machine set blocks is that it's less manually labor intensive. In other words, the guy doesn't have to pick up every single block, schlep it, slide it around, score it, you know, get it set just right. You have the machine do most of that heavy lifting. And you're setting blocks that, you know, might be 2-3 square feet at a time instead of our 2/3 of a square foot standard unit. But with VERSA-LOK, you can transport several blocks, squeeze them together like that, and kind of do that cantilever. I think we had the Mythbusters. You guys remember Mythbusters? Mythbusters launched a cannonball. I don't know what they were testing, ballistic speed or something, but they were testing these things out. They launched a cannonball at these VERSA-LOK blocks, and I think the really amazing thing about it is how many of these blocks were still intact after this cannonball. You can see one kind of flying right now. I think that cannonball ended up in a house like 3 blocks away, if I remember right. Mythbusters got in trouble for that one. Again, solid durability. We'll jump back. So, you know, with a core fill block or a hollow block, if a car runs into it, it's going to break a lot of those blocks, right? And then you got brand new blocks that you're trying to match, you know, from 10 years ago. Like we said, we strive for color consistency, but if you're talking 10 or 15 years, you're going to have to mix those together. Well, this thing ran along the side of this retaining wall, and this is actually at headquarters in Oakdale. All these blocks could be reused. I think we may have had to replace a couple of them because of the glue. We had some glue on the capstone, so we did have to replace a couple of these blocks, but for the most part, they stayed completely intact. So you can see this thing kind of being rebuilt. That's it after. See a couple new corner pieces here and a new capstone, but 95% of that wall is able to be reused even after you have an impact like that. If I remember the story right, that Mustang was like a late night, 2 a.m. Drunk driving stop. The cop, you know, tried to pop the cherries on, and the guy decided he was going to run, take off. Probably got going 50, 60 miles an hour on that little side road and spun out because he must have forgot his Mustang's rear wheel drive. So he slid into the retaining wall, smashed the car. In this case, I'm guessing that car was totaled, so the wall wins, because there it is, back up. And again, same thing with these mailbox pillars. How many of you guys are doing mailbox pillars? Easy money, right? The pillars stack up so fast once you base them out. But again, if it gets hit, you can just come back in and charge, you know, whatever insurance company is going to foot the bill for that. You can charge to just restack that thing. And again, you can see there's parts of the car and the mailbox all over the place. But one thing you'll notice is these blocks are not busted. They're still in one piece. So again, you can just pick those things up and restack them. Yep, and that one looks like it lost the War II battery hanging out there. But that's the car that hit the mailbox. So that dude had a bad day. And there it is, restacked, good as new. Looks like we've got some really big pillars back here. This again would be a case where I'd probably get an engineer involved in these taller pillars. especially if you're going to be mounting any kind of a gate on the pillar. All right, so we've kind of talked about design flexibility, inside-outside curves, multi-angle corners. We'll get into more of the specifics on radius, on multi-angle corners, stairs, all that stuff when we get into the engineering section. But for right now, we just want to touch on this stuff. A lot of this stuff's going to be repeat. When we get into engineering, I'll kind of try to earmark some of the stuff that I know is on the NCMA certification test. So if you guys are going to be taking that, hopefully that'll get you prepared. Stairs, columns, freestanding walls. Personally, this is how I started splitting block. I used a hammer and a chisel, and I still enjoy doing it. It's still kind of fun. There's something caveman, I don't know, whatever it is. I just like it. But, you buy a cracker like this, and that's going to speed you up by 3-4 times. So, but the ability to do that is huge, and that's, again, with design flexibility, when we talk about that, that's what we're referring to. You can do off-center splits, on-center splits. You can split the back end of this off and create a freestanding block. There's just tons of different options all kind of brought together in this one simple little retaining wall block. This is super important. Outside radius, max radius with VERSA-LOK is 8 feet. So if you're building a 3-foot tall retaining wall and you start your base out on an 8-foot outside radius, as you stack up, that radius shrinks, right? Because we have a 3/4 inch batter per row, per vertical row. So if you were building a circle planter, your second row above your base is going to be 1.5 inches smaller than your base row was. So if you start your base out at an 8-foot outside radius, by the time you get up 2-3 rows, your blocks are going to be splitting at the face. Now we've got some tricks that we can do, so if you get stuck in a position like that, you don't have to pull the whole thing apart. There are some tricks of the trade there, but it's very important to make sure that your guys that are basing these walls out know not to set it at the maximum outside radius on that base row. Give yourself 9 feet. Give yourself a little bit of breathing room there so that as you build vertical, you don't start to separate at the face. Same thing is true with inside radiuses. So here we can turn 5.5 foot, which is pretty tight. And the reason that we say 5.5 feet is because we're telling you that you can pin on quarter bond. So if you can pin on quarter bond and you go tighter than 5.5 feet, your pins are going to start to drop into these gaps. So they're not going to give you any structural integrity, and that's why we say 5.5 feet is really the maximum inside radius you can do with VERSA-LOK. No lips to remove. You don't have to worry about, if you're turning a tight corner, you don't have to worry about modifying the block. That used to drive me crazy. I'd buy a new block, and then I'd have to, beat the crap out of it with a hammer to get it to work. It's one nice thing with VERSA-LOK is there's no lips you got to worry about knocking off. And again, design flexibility. This is a picture we've been using for years, but there's so many different elements in here. We've got stairs, inside curves, outside curves, angles, freestanding applications. There's just a lot going on as you master your craft and you get better and better at building these retaining walls. You'll start to kind of appreciate and build a new appreciation when you see a project like that, because there's just so much going on within just that little space. So again, variable bond, this is a mosaic block. I really like the color on this, nice and light. But you can see that we're able to do multi-angle corners. So I mean, this might be like a 30-degree angle here, who knows, and this might be 90. But the idea here is that you can modify your angles to fit the design. So in other words, the block is not limiting your design capability. Your design capability is completely, there's no glass ceiling on it. It's an open book. You can design whatever you want, and that's one thing I really find to be a lot of fun with VERSA-LOK, is that you don't have to worry about a lot of the same things that you do with some other manufacturers. Inside 90s, this is probably the easiest VERSA-LOK corner to do. As you go vertical, you just want to make sure that you're swapping back and forth, right? One question I get a lot is, do you have to pin that corner? What do you guys think? Yay or nay? Do you need to pin it? Whoever said no is right, no pins required there. I usually put a little dab of glue on this corner just to lock it together. I don't know if it's a necessity, but I just like it. It's cheap insurance. So I'll put a dab of glue on that inside corner right there as I'm stacking. I will pin the other side of the block. I'll drop a pin through here into this block, but then this inside part here I'll glue. One other thing that happens, and I don't know if you guys have built walls that have large inside corners like this, but as you stack, you'll see that this gap kind of gets created right in here. So when you go to cap this wall, you're kind of like feeling like, wow, this block's hanging, 6 inches over that edge. What am I going to do about that? Some guys do shim these corners. So, if you got a block that you're breaking, whatever it is, you can stack another little row of block back there just to support the capstone. And again, there's inside, outside. Same thing with mosaic. It gets a little bit trickier with mosaic, and that's again why we recommend the field guides. It's the same game with the inside corners, but it's a different game with the outside corners. We'll kind of run through that. So there's an inside and an outside. And that's how you're going to split your standard outside radius. One thing I see here that I always point out is that we've got these lines on the top of the block, right? Those lines, they're there as part of the manufacturing process, but super visible in this picture. You can really see, it almost looks like a little tiger claw or whatever on the corner there. So what I'll train my guys to do is flip these blocks over when I'm building a pillar or an outside corner. And you'll see that right there. Here's the before, and there's the after. So you can see it's just a much cleaner look. To me, it's kind of that professional polish that separates the DIY weekend warrior guys from the guys that do this for a living. Minor detail again, but we're all here to master our craft, and any little tips that we can share with each other, it's a win for all of us. So flip those corners over, and you can see right here again, that's evident right there that one's not flipped and that one's not flipped. So I look at that wall and I'm thinking Joe homeowner built it, or he hired the guy that mows his lawn to build it, right? He didn't hire a retaining wall company to do this wall. Step downs. So we talk about two different kinds of step downs, right? There's a step down on the base of the wall, and then there's a step down on the top of the wall. This is referring to the top step down. So we've got this block right here that we split. That way it's got a rough face texture on 2 sides instead of just the face. And this is kind of that picture of, it just looks unfinished, right? None of the caps are split, none of the blocks are split. Again, it's one of those professional polish items that to me separates guys that aren't doing this for a living and aren't taking it serious from the guys that are. Again, these grates, right? Talked about drainage a little bit. We just barely touched on it, but drainage behind these retaining walls is essential. And so you're gonna have a drain tile behind almost every retaining wall. There's a better way to do that, right? We get a grate, we cover that up, make it look polished, make it look professional. It's all these little things that you can do to separate yourself from the fly-by-night guys. And there, again, that's the split face. It just looks finished. It's more professional. To me, that looks like a polished retaining wall. I can tell whoever built that and put that together knows what they're doing. So mosaic, I told you the outside corners are a little bit different, and this is what I mean, is that you're actually gonna have to split this accent block as well. And then you can see this corner split down here, we had to make a cut. So it's one extra piece of fabrication that you have to do when you're talking about a mosaic retaining wall. That's all in the field guide. So if you do have a mosaic wall, talk to your rep, make sure that you get a field guide. Same thing is true with mosaic. Once again, we're gonna wanna flip these blocks over so that we're not looking at those tiger paws on the corner. But you can see how easy it is to stack that up. And again, why it's so important that you're able to stack and pin on a variable bond so that you don't have to cut little shim blocks in. If you're working with a block that has to be on a half bond, you're gonna have a bunch of weird little cuts on corners because your wall length's always changing. Just like on a circle, the radius is gonna change with the height of the wall. Well, same thing is true when you're talking about these corners. So if you got a setback, these cheek walls are going to change in length, right? So eventually you're going to have to cut a weird little slug in. And again, that's just a big advantage with VERSA-LOK, is not having to cut little, slugs into your block wall. We're going to show you how to do this a little bit later. But when we talk about multi-angle corners, we're able to do 40 degrees, we can do 30 degrees, whatever it is. We can modify the block to fit the angle that we need, and it's as simple as just cracking this corner off. And now in this picture, we see this back corner is split off. If I'm on site and I'm fabricating that block, I'm gonna cut that. I want that to be a clean line because you are gonna see that at the face of the wall. And you can see that right here. So that's gonna be a nice little cut. We've cut more of an angle here than we do on this split. That way you leave a little bit of gap in there. That way those blocks aren't trying to separate at the face. But again, one split, one cut, and you can modify this block to do so many different jobs. When we're doing these, we're gonna make sure that we're overlapping our joints. Again, we're always trying to create bond. On most of these angles, it just so happens that little cut right there is gonna be about 4 inches. So I know this it's a little bit out of proportion, but this should be about a 4-inch gap right here. That way when you stack that block on, you can see that the receiving slot is gonna take the pin. That way you've got structural integrity. So you're just gonna flip these things over, and again, I'd put a dab of glue on these outside corners as well. You're gonna pin the outside edges. Out here gets pinned. Inside, this is all just gonna get glued. So we're just swapping that back and forth. You got to be careful on these, because if you try to split this, I want to go back. If you try to split this and you get too close to this slot right here, you'll see that it'll actually show through, right? And so at that point, you've ruined that block. That block's not good for anything but a door stop, or you can use it as a backfill item, whatever it is, but the block's toast. So you do have to be careful, make sure that you're keeping off of that little slot right there. Who's seen a wall like that? I bet there's P-rock behind that retaining wall, right? There's just, you see so many things. You do this long enough, you see crazy, crazy stuff. I can't believe they got cars parked up on there. I don't know what's keeping that wall up, but this to me is an indicator that, again, he hired somebody, whatever, he got the cheapest bid. He probably had 3 guys come in. One guy was $50 a square foot. This guy was probably 20, right? Because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So, you never want a vertical line on your corner like that. You're always trying to create a bond. I'm sure you can immediately see the difference between what VERSA-LOK's recommending for its outside corners and what this guy did. He tried to miter it. He tried to build it like it's a picture frame. Well, it's not a picture frame. It's a retaining wall. So bear in mind that when you're doing this, you never want to have vertical seams like that go up through 2 or 3 rows of block. So again, here you can see where we've got the offset. This is a nice professional finish. This wall, you can look at, you can tell that somebody knows what they're doing, built it. I do want to point out on these corners, you do have to be careful when you're splitting them, because if you end up with a bump out, we've got all kinds of colorful names for those little bump outs on job sites. I'll keep those to myself for right now. But those little bump outs, you can take a chisel and you can kind of see it here that he's kind of scraped away a little bit on that corner just to get that so that it's nice and flat. But again, you got to be a little bit careful when you're making those splits to avoid those bump outs. Same thing is true with VERSA-LOK on inside corners. Multi-angle inside corners, easy to do. We're going to use a jumper with this system. So instead of just stacking like we did on the inside 90 degree, we're actually going to use sort of a bridge block is what we'll call that. This is another situation where I might actually base out another little block back here in that gap just to support the back of this block, depending on what the angle is. If you've got a really aggressive angle, you're going to have a really wide gap. So you might have to get something in there just to support it. I'd probably put a dab of glue on it, slap it together, cash the check. And again, because we've got an 8-inch block, 8-inch wide block here, we're immediately on bond. We're immediately on a quarter bond. We don't have to cut a little slug in. It's all done for us. We can just keep stacking. And that's one thing with these walls too, as you build bigger walls, Last thing you want to be doing when you're building these walls is taking one hat off and go and put another hat on and start doing something else. You want to have assembly line, like I was thinking about Henry Ford, you want to have assembly line efficiency on your job sites where you've got guys doing the same thing over and over and over. Repetition, repetition. You know, if you can have a guy just keep stacking and pinning, another guy pinning, you just keep those guys rolling, you'll have a wall up in no time. But if you got to stop and you got to putz around and, you know, break little pieces and cut little slugs, stuff like that, you got to go get the gas saw fired up. Jimmy probably put, you know, diesel in the fuel can instead of mixed gas. And so again, it's just something where you got to change gears, do something different. It's always going to slow you down and reduce efficiency. So with here, we just use the jumper, again, dab of glue, pin, and that wall's done. Really nice professional look on it. You do miter the capstones. You know, I hate when guys leave big gaps up there on those angles. You want to make sure and get that cut as clean as you can, but that's really the only cut required because VERSA-LOK does sell these cobble units. So you don't even have to cut those. Those you can just pre-order if you want to. You know, if you don't feel like pre-ordering them, you can modify the block on site. Stairs, so, you know, again, you can use the same block for steps, and this is called a pedestal step. So what we got here is if you look, you got several blocks back from the face, and then we're just stacking. And guys, look at this and like, wow, you're wasting a lot of block, right? You're burying a lot of retaining wall block there. But what you're losing in material, you're gaining tenfold in efficiency because what you've done is you've set up a platform for these stairs where you're going back 4 risers. So instead of stopping again, taking my block stacking hat off, going and getting gravel, packing gravel in and setting each step individually, I can set 4 at one time, and that's going to speed you up exponentially. I make sure that I get a little bit of overlap. I like just a little bit of overlap on these. And what I mean by that is that the face of this block is just coming onto the back lip of the block that it's setting on, and I'll run a glue bead along that back and then set that block down. Do you need glue, you know, on these back blocks back here that are, you know, all going to be buried? I put it on there. It's cheap insurance, right? And there's a guy selling that glue that's got to feed his kids too, so use the glue. Get it all, you know, locked together really nice, and they'll last forever. I've been building steps like this for, like I said, 20 years. I go back to my old jobs. I drive by them. These stairs hold together forever. You can use a capstone. A lot of guys use a bullnose tread for the stair treads. Again, design flexibility. You know, you can use bullnose to cap a retaining wall. You can use bullnose to cap stairs. This is the traditional AB cap system. Here we're going to do an exposed step where we've got the one side is going to be exposed and the other side is going to be hugging a retaining wall, but it's the same method. All we're really doing is creating bond in here, and instead of stacking these blocks corner to corner, we're going to stack them back, and you'll see why we do that here in just a second. Again, we're just splitting that corner block. So we get that corner block split, stack this block so we got a little bit of overlap, and that's going to give you a vertical outside profile unless you're snugging up to a wall that's got that 3/4 inch batter. So, you know, say this is a mortar wall or a house foundation. This outside, and it is important to know as you're planning these projects out, this outside is going to step back 3/4 of an inch every single row when you're stacking it next to a VERSA-LOK retaining wall like this. If you're stacking against something that's vertical, this outside cheek wall is going to stay vertical as well. So just make sure that you're planning for that. But you can see again, 3/4 inch step back. We're just stacking blocks on blocks, gluing everything together, and then we'll cap it. So pretty much the exact same procedure that we use on the what we call an inset step, and that's what we went over first. This is our inset step. This is what we would call an exposed step. So that's capped, done. Cashing the check on that one too. And here's this is going to be exposed on 2 sides. One thing about VERSA-LOK, because you got a 16-inch width, you know that 3 blocks are always going to be 4 feet, right? 16, 32, 48. So 3 blocks makes a nice wide 4-foot tread. If you go 2 blocks, it's going to be a little bit more narrow, 32-inch tread, depending on space allocation and just overall design. I've gone both routes, right? Not everybody likes holding hands while they're walking up the stairs, so 32 inches is really plenty for one person. But again, we're using that same method. We're going to core fill, just do one skid row right down the middle there. And it's fine to bridge that gap that you're going to get between the back of these blocks and the sides of that center. You can bridge that with another block. So you can see right here, again, we've bridged across. I like the fact that we've got a bond underneath these 2 blocks. We've just got split blocks here, right? We've just split those right in half, flipped them upside down so we're not seeing the ruts. And very simple, very effective, very efficient way to build stairs. I still charge a ton for steps because again, it's you're not just building a retaining wall and stacking block. You have to stop, you have to modify block, maybe fabricate some stuff on site. It takes time, it all takes time, so make sure you're charging according for all that stuff. Same thing, cap it off. You can use bullnose or standard caps, but VERSA-LOK allows you to do so many different jobs with the same block. And again, that was just one thing that was super attractive to me as I started out in the industry. So you can see here, these are those preformed caps that we've got over here. We've got black and a light gray. We make a 2-foot wide runner, and then there's also, I believe it's a 16-inch beveled. We still making that? The beveled? Yeah, okay. I like the 2-foot straight ones. Only time I would move away from that is if I'm doing like a curved seat wall, and I don't want to have to cut every single capstone. So here's a nice shot. I mean, talk about cuts. That looks like tons of fun. Trying to cut those blocks at an angle like that. But again, it's a finishing touch. I'm sure he charged according for that, and it looks great in the pictures, right? So the extra effort pays off. I mean, here we are using it in our seminar. So sometimes it pays to go a little bit outside the box and do some really cool stuff like that. You get charged for it, make extra money, do something unique that makes your company stand out. And again, columns, great money makers, easy to stack. This is like a cat chasing its tail is all this is, right? You're gonna set your base row up, and then your second row is gonna have an overlap. We're gonna glue all that together. You can stack it up to, I believe, 4, maybe 5 feet. We'll go over the installation software just after lunch, and we'll see how tall the engineering software will allow us to build these pillars. I mean, you can go higher, but then you're talking about an engineered plan where you're probably gonna do a core fill, right? You might have to pour concrete down through the center column to give it a little bit of extra weight and beef. So we're gonna glue this thing together, 3 rows. So we've got a 1.5 feet right there at 6-inch high block. So we've got 12, 18 inches. I usually go about 3 feet with my pillars if they're just decorative. Really, really easy, really, really cool way to just add like an extra element to your project. Anything you can do to make yourself stand out. These ones right here, definitely engineered. They're load bearing to some extent. Even though this fence is probably not taking much wind shear, it's still a load, right? It still needs to get mounted on there. These are probably core filled with concrete, and they might even have a full frost footing underneath them. Again, this is a situation where if I design this project, if it doesn't fit the parameters of the VERSA-LOK estimating software, I'm probably gonna get in touch with my geotech guy, send it over to Paul and see what his thoughts are on it, see if he needs to add a little bit of extra support for these pillars. Seat walls, same thing. Upsell opportunity, right? You're doing a patio, whatever it is, say you got $5,000, $10,000 patio, you can really quickly build up $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 seat walls here. And as long as you know the parameters ahead of time, you can design these things to be super efficient and profitable. Stick to that 8-foot outside radius. Don't deviate from that, because if you do, you're going to be cutting every single block on every single row. It's going to take a ton of time. So plan ahead a little bit. That's where knowing the block capabilities become so important. You're not gonna make money. If you bid this little seat wall right here, if you bid that at the same price when you don't have to cut as when you do have to cut, you're gonna lose a ton of money on that job, because I mean, it's literally gonna triple the time it'll take you to build that seat wall. So make sure you're planning ahead for that. Okay, yeah, so like Jimmy was saying, the capstones for the seat walls, well, first of all, this is the A-B system. I believe that's the same radius too. So if you set these block walls up correctly, you won't have to even cut your capstones, which again, I mean, I just love doing that. You glue it, send everybody home, and it's done. So make sure that you're thinking about block specs as you're designing and installing these projects. That's really cool. I like how they've done sort of a preformed poured cap on these, and again, you know, charge for these cuts, right? You've got a square block that you're trying to fit into a circular area. Make sure you're charging for those cuts. And this down here is super custom, right? Is that at your house, Jim? That's Jimmy's house. So, you know, he took his time and did these accent borders coming through here, creating contrast. Again, with the colors available, you can do some really fun stuff if you play around with that a little bit. We've got kits. This is a kit for the couch. You can see it's tons of blocks, super heavy. I do not believe that we're requiring a frost footing for this. You can still set it on a gravel pad, but you know that that's probably what, 2-3 pallets of block, somewhere in there. It's quite a bit of block. Make sure you're charging according. You can see the difference between this and the picture that we saw just previous. Those capstones make a world of difference, just kind of dressing things up. So here's sort of the procedure on that couch. You can see again, we're leaving a gap down the middle here. You know, that's gonna be, if you're doing lighting, that's gonna be a great opportunity for you to run those wires through there, you know, feed them through the face. You can downlight these things, all kinds of cool stuff you can do. And there's the fam grilling marshmallows there. This is a new thing, VERSA-LOK step unit. These are super cool, I love them. Super affordable, they go in fast. I wouldn't use the same pedestal system that we use with a traditional block. I would stack those on class 5 and then set each one independent. So again, we've talked about all this, kind of run through it. Design flexibility, top to bottom pinning, multiple options with the same block, under the same roof, same umbrella, whatever you want to call it, variable bond, just the ability to be very flexible with these blocks. So bottom line, do more, do it easier, right? Make more money faster, work less, enjoy life more. So with that, I think that about wraps up the installation part. Are there any questions?